Hey folks, this is Mike Antile with Sailfish Solar. I just wanted to talk a little bit about what's going on with net metering in Florida in the year 2022. You probably have seen some legislation or read some articles that's taking place right now. There is legislation that's out there. The investor-owned utilities in Florida are going after the program known as net metering. In the current customers, hopefully, are going to be grandfathered in for 25 years. The current legislation only says 10 years, so that's one problem that we really have to fix. Let's make sure that the utility companies are honoring the obligation, to the customers who signed up in good faith and are certainly upholding their end of the agreements that they signed with Florida Power and Light. But beyond that, what's really going to happen with this legislation is it's going to affect the market moving forward. Right now we have a full retail exchange for net metering. So you sell power during the daytime. For the excess power that you sell, you get a retail credit, and then when the sun goes down, you eat up those credits. So the misinformation that the utilities are trying to spread is that right now that somehow non-solar customers are subsidizing solar customers with this particular net metering scheme. I understand that there is a time when we get to about 20% market penetration where that might start to make sense, but here today in 2022 with only 90,000 solar customers, that is not even remotely close to an argument that holds water. Nevertheless, the utilities are pursuing it, and the legislature in Florida, unfortunately, they do have a tendency to follow the folks with the big checkbooks, and the utility companies have great big checkbooks. So for what it's worth, there is an inherent conflict of interest to begin with utility companies, because on the one hand, they are a regulated monopoly. So, obviously you can't go and buy power from somebody else. That's something that they fought very hard in the 2016 election to make sure that you couldn't buy power from anybody other than the monopoly utilities. But also, and the benefit that they get for this is basically a guaranteed rate of return on capital expenditures. So every time they go build a new facility or new power lines or new, a turbine facility or a peaker plant or whatever the case is, the utility comes in and are getting that guaranteed rate of return. Now, there's some varying math on that, but it's somewhere in like the 11 to 14% range. Don't quote me on that, but it is kind of right there. That's a good return. I would love that return guaranteed, in my line of work, or anybody's line of work for that matter. But nevertheless, the challenge is that the investor-owned utilities are owned by Wall Street companies like NextEra is a publicly traded Wall Street company, Duke Power, publicly traded Wall Street company, and then they have a portion of the company that's this kind of regulated monopoly piece. So right out of the gates, there's this inherent conflict, but that's a conversation that's way bigger, than this video or something we can get into. What we want to talk about on this video is 4 things that are kind of proof that this argument that net metering is somehow a cross-subsidization just does not hold water. Okay, so the first and what I would consider to be kind of one of the most important is the idea of transmission loss, right? So when your power is being produced at a facility 30 or 40, 50 miles away, and it travels through the power lines before it finally comes to your house, there's massive loss of efficiency, in the power lines, in that power that's produced, far away and then finally makes it to your house. Again, the numbers on that vary depending on who you talk to and what research you can look at. It can be anywhere from 20% all the way up to like 40% in terms of loss of efficiency. So right out of the gates, you're paying to produce power that's getting lost along the power lines along the way. With a distributed model to where customers have solar on their rooftops, if you're net metering and you sell excess power during the day, the power goes out of your house, it goes through the transmission line about this far, and then it goes to your neighbor's house, right? Just like water, it flows to the lowest point, the quickest place of consumption. So it's not like the electrons leave your house, travel all the way back to the nuclear power plant, and then turn around and go to your neighbor's house. They go out and then down into your neighbor's house. What you've just done is you've benefited your fellow ratepayers, because now you're reducing wear and tear on the grid. You're reducing the cost that it takes to actually transfer that power all the way, from the central source to your neighbor's house or what have you. And you're actually benefiting your fellow ratepayers by reducing the amount of cost that it takes to actually maintain the grid. So right out of the gates, net metering is a benefit to your neighbors and to your fellow ratepayers. The second thing is is the idea of public versus private investment, right? The utility companies, there's one in particular, Florida Power and Light, they love to pretend that they're the biggest and the greenest and this and that. And it is true, they have invested a lot. Well, they have, but you have, because you're the one who's actually paying for that, because you're the ratepayer, right? So they're using your money to build these solar farms, and then they're turning around and they're selling you the power that the solar farms created in the first place. What we're talking about is, instead of using your money to pay for their solar farm, you use your money to invest in your own solar system. The problem there, of course, is, look, every kilowatt that you have on your roof is a kilowatt that the utilities don't get to sell you. And if we're being completely honest, that is the root of everything that we were talking about. That's the reason for this legislation. That's the reason that we're going through this exercise, is because every time you put a kilowatt on your roof, it's a kilowatt that they don't get to sell you. There is no two ways about that. So they'll dance around and they'll never admit to that, but that is the truth. So what we're talking about is, instead of the ratepayers paying for their production facilities, let's have the ratepayers, the homeowners, pay for their own production facility. All right. The third thing is, when we're producing power, especially when we're producing solar power on our west-facing arrays, and we're producing power in that 4 o'clock to 6 o'clock in the afternoon, the time that they call peak demand, we're actually reducing the need for the utility company to flip on those big turbine plants. They call them peaker plants. And we're reducing the need to, number one, turn those on in the afternoon, and number two, to actually have to build a new one. Again, utility companies don't like that. They like building those new plants because they're getting a massive rate of return on that. So those are kind of the big three. And then the fourth one would be, an idea of what's called peak shaving, which is similar to what we're talking about. We're basically shaving down that peak time, that peak demand, when they actually do have to turn on those power plants. So those are the big three reasons, but make no mistake about it, net metering is a benefit to your fellow ratepayers. It's a benefit to your fellow Floridians. And until we get to the point where we have, let's call it, even 10% market penetration. Right now we're not even at 1% market penetration in FP&L territory, and we're about 1.5% market penetration in Duke territory. So once we get to around 10%, then maybe this cross-subsidization argument starts to make a little bit of sense, but we're not even close to there. Again, we have 90,000 rooftops in the state of Florida. There should be 6 or 7 million homes that could potentially have solar on their roof, and it is a benefit to your fellow ratepayers, no matter how they want to slice it. So, and then my last and not least, since this just came out, there's been a ton of editorials and news that's shared this legislative session. And Florida Power and Light, they basically came out and they said that they call it a subsidy. And they say it's a $30 or $60 million subsidy that's taking place today. But what they're actually referring to is a loss of revenue. Right. And so the loss of revenue is not a subsidy. Just because the regulated monopoly isn't making the returns that they were, does not mean that that's a subsidy for fellow ratepayers. Under that argument, basically what they're saying is, so if I put in a new air conditioner, does that mean that my fellow ratepayers are now burdened by subsidizing, my house because my air conditioner is now more efficient? Because everything with Florida Power and Light, or with the utility companies, is all about backup power, and they want to be able to reserve power. And so the drawback there is, that's fine. The utilities, their big thing is they call it the obligation to serve. And they do have an obligation to serve, and they do have an obligation to act as backup power if the solar goes down or whatever the case is. But the challenge is with the obligation to serve, they're already getting paid for that obligation to serve with that guaranteed rate of return that the monopoly utilities get. You as a customer, you do not have an obligation to be served. You have no obligation to make sure that your power bill is at a minimum of $100 a month. Otherwise, your fellow ratepayers are going to have to, somehow subsidize you. The argument itself just doesn't make sense. Under what they're saying, under this loss, they're equating loss of revenue to a subsidy. Imagine just this is just a not real thing, but just imagine if this happened, that all of a sudden a new highly efficient air conditioner became public domain, right? And so you can air condition your house for $100 a year, let's call it. This would be huge for a lot of people in Florida, because it's going to be very, very expensive to air condition your house. It's by far the biggest part of our bill. All right. And so let's say that everybody in Florida, for not even $100 a lifetime, you go out and you buy this system for $100 and you now have free air conditioning for the rest of your life. So Florida Power and Light and the utility companies, their revenue is going to go down as a result of that. Does that mean that they're going to be lobbying next legislative session to make sure that other customers aren't subsidizing the people who put in this magical air conditioner? I mean, it just doesn't hold water. So again, yes, they have an obligation to serve. We're paying them for that obligation to serve. They get a monopoly because of that obligation to serve. But to say that one customer who doesn't have solar is subsidizing a customer who does have solar, it just doesn't add water. It just doesn't hold water. It doesn't add up. So just a couple of bullet points on why net metering is so crucial, and it truly is a benefit to your fellow ratepayers, not a burden to your fellow ratepayers. I hope this was somewhat helpful. We'll continue to put out more information, but I always get a kick out of that that spin they try to put on things. So we thought we'd put in a couple words here as to why that's just not true. All right, thanks for stopping by, and if you haven't taken action already, please make sure you take action to support net metering in the state of Florida. Thank you.